Hi everyone, welcome to the Brain Fix podcast, discussing all things brain. I'm Professor David Brough, Professor of Neuroinflammation at the University of Manchester.
And I'm Prof. Omar Pathmanaban, Professor of Neurosurgery in Manchester.
In today's podcast, we will be answering the question, who was Sir Geoffrey Jefferson?
Yeah, I mean, most people now know the name from the eponymous Geoffrey Jefferson Brain Research Centre, but where does it take its name from? He undoubtedly, Dave, was one of the greatest influences of the modern era of neurosurgery. So let's start at the beginning.
Okay, Geoffrey Jefferson was born on the 10th of April in 1886 in County Durham and was the son of well-known surgeon and GP Dr. A.J. Jefferson of Rochdale. Jeff, as he became known to everyone, was educated firstly at Manchester Grammar School and then studied medicine at the University of Manchester, graduating in 1909, and was awarded the University Gold Medal when he took his mastership in surgery.
Yeah, and one of Jeff's first jobs was as a demonstrator of anatomy in the University of Manchester in the lab of Prof. Elliot Smith. And it was here, when he was making investigations into the brain and the sulci of the cortex, that he got his lifelong bug for anatomy and neurosurgery. And in 1914, Jeff married Gertrude Flumenfeld, and they were former students together. And they ended up moving together to her childhood home of Vancouver in Canada to explore surgical opportunities. And at the time, this was a common practice for young surgeons who couldn't find the sorts of opportunities for their big breaks in the UK and would travel transatlantic. It was a big loss of brain and talent at the time. As it happened, for Jeff, war broke out. And in 1915, the Jeffersons returned to Europe. And Jeff went to the Anglo-Russian hospital in Petrograd at the invitation of Sir Herbert Waterhouse. And then after that, he went on to France, where he headed a department dealing with gunshot wounds and trauma. And as is the sad truth, you know, many medical advances and scientific advancements happen at times of war. And Jeff's time is no different. He made important observations and advancements in head injury management at this time. But I think it speaks to the nature of the man and his reflective nature, that even after that challenging, stressful period in that wartime environment, he continued to analyze those cases that he managed over that time and continued to make further contributions and used all of that information and experience that he'd built to influence much more widely than just those patients he'd treated, and try to have a much bigger impact on the care of patients within neurosurgery worldwide.
Yeah, and so we see this, that and after the war in 1919, when Jeff joined Salford Royal Hospital, and soon after the Manchester Royal Infirmary, he sets up a neurosurgery department. He opened the neurosurgical laboratories in 1926 in Manchester. Next year, that will be 100 years.
That's absolutely incredible.
And once a fortnight, Jeff would operate at the National Hospital in Queen Square, London. And they were actually very keen on recruiting him away from Manchester. But in 1939, the award of a chair in neurosurgery...
The first chair of neurosurgery in the UK.
Exactly. That ensured that he stayed in Manchester. War broke out again, and Jeff became a consultant neurosurgical advisor to the Ministries of Health and of Pensions, where he managed to establish a network of neurosurgical centres across the country.
And in this unbelievable hive of activity throughout all of that period, he won innumerable awards, honorary degrees, lots of prestigious invited lectures, too many to list. But I think some of the highlights are he was made Fellow of the Royal Society in 1947, which is an unbelievably rare honour for a surgeon. And then he received a knighthood in 1950, becoming Sir Jefferson. And then in the same year, 1950, Manchester Royal Infirmary, or MRI, opened him a fully equipped, standalone neurosurgical unit. And just a year later, at 65, he retired and left that legacy then for those who followed on from him. But he carried on doing lots of important work from bodies like the Medical Research Council, where he became the first chairman of clinical research. And then sadly, in 1961, in January, Jeff and his wife Trudy died within days of each other.
So that's the man, Omar. But what exactly did he do in terms of neurosurgery?
Wow. I mean, Jeff was huge. His influence was vast. He was a prolific writer, speaker, and leader. He was really the instrumental force in the establishment of the Society of British Neurological Surgeons in 1926. Don't know if you know that the SBNS, Society of British, we're called the Nutcrackers by the rest of the medical
I
community.
didn't know that. That makes you a nutcracker.
I'm a nutcracker. I'm a nutcracker. But he served twice as the president of the SBNS, and his reach really went the globe wide because he was the first president of the International Congress of Neurological Surgery in 1957. And it was that year that he presided over the establishment of the World Federation of Neurological Surgery that year, or the WFNS. He, of course, was appointed as the country's first university chair of neurosurgery here in Manchester. And he was pivotal in that role with the Ministry of Health in establishing the network of neurosurgical centres that could deal with head injuries and acute neurological problems countrywide. And that UK network is still very similar today as to when he set it up. And he clinically as well covered a huge range of surgical neurology. He gave his name to the Jefferson fracture, still called that now. It's a fracture of the first cervical vertebra, or atlas. And in one of our areas of interest, Dave, schwannomas, which is a benign nerve sheath tumour for those who don't know, he named a classification of trigeminal schwannomas, so the nerve of the cranial nerve 5 of sensation to the face. He named that classification the Jefferson classification. Wow. And he published seminal work across the full spectrum of pathology, intracranial aneurysms, all the way through to pituitary tumours. And actually, if you get a chance, the John Rylands Library have got a fantastic archive of his papers. Much of it hasn't even been gone through yet, but I've flicked through some of it, and he worked with the doyenne of medical art at the time, Dorothy Davison, and has got beautiful illustrations of the work that they were doing together at that time, and it's definitely worth a look.
That's really interesting. I'm definitely going to make a point of going there to see that. It wasn't just neurosurgery, was it, Omar? I mean, Jeff was an intellectual, and he contributed to the mind-machine controversy that was brewing in England in the late 1940s.
Yeah, I mean, Jeff really was an amazing philosopher as well as a surgeon and scientist and leader and everything else that he was. Although I understand that he used to object to being described as a philosopher, he was. If you read a lot of his papers, he was very philosophical. But he was involved in very high-profile debates with Alan Turing about artificial intelligence. He presented arguments that really shaped Turing's thinking. So in 1949, he gave a famous Lister oration, and he argued against the idea that machines could really think. He thought that true intelligence required the ability to, say, create art or a sonnet or concerto from thoughts that are based in emotion, and that given that machines lack subjective experience, they can't do that. And that hugely influenced Turing's seminal 1950 paper, where he really addressed Jeff's objections and proposed the imitation game, or the Turing test, as a test of machine intelligence. And you know, I don't know enough about that, and I think we need to do another podcast with an AI expert to delve into that more.
Definitely.
But these debates between these two great men reached a head in 1952 with a live televised debate on the BBC, which I've not seen, but I'd love to get hold of a copy of that.
Yeah, we must do. So Jeff was a colossus of his time. In addition to being held in high regard for his intellect, his experience, and his vast contributions to neurosurgery, Jeff was also known as an utterly approachable man with an excellent sense of humour and a keen wit. He was also known to have exceptionally poor timekeeping, and would be completely unconcerned upon arriving very late. He is said to have had incredible charm and would fill any room with his presence, and had that gift of leadership where all those around him instinctively wanted to work with him and impress him.
Yeah, he apparently was had enormous gravitas. and a sharp tongue if something happened that he didn't like. He wouldn't hold back, but equally he would hurl lavish praise when he thought something had been done well or was to his liking. And he definitely was that person that people wanted to follow.
So as a neurosurgeon, Omar, how have Jeff's teachings and research influenced your training and career?
Well, I suppose at its simplest level, I work in Manchester, which is the legacy unit of Jeff, and everything that's developed here onwards has really developed as a result of the foundations that he built, and we're now one of the largest centres in the UK, one of the largest centres in Europe, doing neurosurgery, and we're very proud of everything that the unit's doing, and working together with the Geoffrey Jefferson Brain Research Centre to continue building that. But beyond that, his influence on me isn't just from what exists around us here in Manchester, but my time in Toronto, where I spent some time training. I was amazed to hear that one of his protégés, Thomas Morley, had travelled from Manchester to go and work in Toronto, and ultimately ended up becoming the chairman of neurosurgery in Toronto. And he laid down a tradition of academic neurosurgery, or being a surgeon scientist, where academic surgeons would spend time both in the lab and doing clinical work, which has led to the Toronto division becoming really the world's powerhouse for academic output in the field, and of course that all stems back really to Jeff, where Morley had done his training here in Manchester.
So in brief, Sir Geoffrey Jefferson, a neurosurgical giant from Manchester.
A giant in general, I think.
Omar, it's been a pleasure. We definitely need to follow up with more discussion on Jeff and his legacy.
I'd be absolutely delighted, Dave.
This has been the Brain Fix podcast. Thank you very much for listening. Any feedback on this or future content or sponsorship inquiries, please send to the DNS inbox. That's dns@manchester.ac.uk. I'll repeat that, dns@manchester.ac.uk. Please include the word podcast in the subject line. Tune in next time for more neuroscience.
Bye from me.